coming. We're going to go ahead and get started just so that we have the most time possible for our panel. I wanted to thank you for coming to this year's author fair. For those of you who aren't aware, El Segundo is celebrating its centennial this year, so 100 years of being El Segundo. And appropriately, our theme this year is Images of the Past Become Stories of the Future. So Eric Bietner is our moderator for the History Mystery panel. And Eric is a mystery and crime writer who also is an El Segundo resident. Eric's books include Roadrunners and its sequel, Leadfoot, The Devil Doesn't Want Me, When the Devil Comes to Call, and most recently, The Devil at Your Door is 2017, among other titles. The Anthony Award is what Eric has just recently been nominated for two of them. Best Paperback Original for Leadfoot and Best Anthology for Unloaded, Crime Writers Writing Without Guns. And that will be announced in October?
Yes.
October. So please help me welcome Eric Bietner.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and I love that it took me about 3 minutes to drive here. That was sorry, guys, who are coming from Glendale and points east. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the history of mystery, and I'm glad that we have assembled an illustrious panel who everyone knows exactly what they're talking about, including Brett, who is going to answer all of the deep factual information about no, that's not you. Okay. Well, let me introduce our panel. I'm going to start at the far end with our writing team of Janet Elizabeth Lynn and Will Zeilinger. Now, Janet writes a few different mystery series, one that includes the novels South of the Pier, East of the Pier, West of the Pier, and for our first mystery of the day, can anyone guess what the fourth one is? Very good. You're mystery fans.
Rather imaginative, huh?
Yes. I guess you topped out at 4. That's it. There's really nowhere else to go. Southeast.
Couldn't figure out another direction.
Yeah. Well, with Will Zeilinger, together they write the hard-boiled Schuyler Drake mysteries set right here in Los Angeles in the 1950s. And so if that doesn't qualify them to be on the History of Mystery panel, what does? So welcome you two. And immediately to their right is Lita Sedaris. She's the author of Murder and Other Natural Disasters, also set right here. Unnatural disasters, thank you. And that is set right here in LA as well, and it's a novel that Kirk has called a smart caper with a heroine to match. She describes her books as soft-boiled, which I love, so you're sort of a little bit more than a cozy, but not quite hard-boiled. You're filling that gap that needs to be filled, apparently. All right, excellent. Welcome. Richard Lang is right there. He has written celebrated short story collections Dead Boys and Sweet Nothing, as well as the novels This Wicked World, Angel Baby, and the upcoming The Smack, which is only a few weeks away, right, Richard?
Yeah, early July.
All right. Well, he's been nominated and accoladed with all the awards and praise, so I will stop before it goes to his head. And then to his right, Mr. Gar Anthony Haywood, the award-winning author of many books, including the Aaron Gunner series and standalones like Cemetery Road, Assume Nothing, Maneater, and Firecracker. A wordsmith and a gentleman. Thank you for joining us, Gar. And finally here at the end, who's a little bit nervous all week leading up to this, but we're going to be kind on him, Mr. Brett Battles, the major best-selling writer of multiple series, including, let me take a deep breath, the Jonathan Quinn thrillers, the Project Eden thrillers, the Rewind novels, the brand new XCOM series, among many others. He churns out bestsellers like the rest of us write grocery lists. Welcome, everyone.
The keyword there is thrillers.
That's right. Well, we're going to take a wide view of mystery, crime, thriller. We're going to include it all under our umbrella today, because really starting way back with the Greeks, murder has been a central plot point of probably a majority of all fiction when you get down to it. There's some sort of murder or death at the heart of almost every story that you read. Going up through Shakespeare, has there ever been more murder than Shakespeare? I don't think so. And then leading all the way up to the late 1800s, you have the advent of Sherlock Holmes, you have Crime and Punishment, and then that really ushers in, at the turn of the century, the more modern mystery era, which led us also to the noir and detective fiction, all the way up through the pulps, through adventure fiction and to modern day thrillers, which is where we are today. And I think all of us here are proud and honored to be a part of this illustrious tradition. So I want to start off and know from you guys, do you have a favorite era to read in when you reach for a book in the past? Like, do you go all the way back to the turn of the century, those Sherlock Holmes? Do you go to the 40s, the 50s? Let's just start at the end there with Jan and William.
I reach for the 50s, the nice hard-boiled, sexy stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what started, the reason we write together, we're on our 4th book together, we're still married. And what I did is I asked myself, why do I want it hard-boiled so bad? I love it. So I decided to write it. And I chose 1955 because that's the first memories I have of my mother. I'm from New York. And I remember sitting on her bed watching her get dressed as she always adjusted her hat. And then there was the glove ritual, and because the hat had to match the belt, the shoes, and the purse. And because this is from New York, she never left without that ritual. So that's why I chose 1955 to write our novels. And since it comes out of a guy's head, I asked my husband, who's already had 4 books, how would you like to get together and do it? And he said, sure, more than happy to. So since it comes out of a guy's head, we're working together on that.
Yeah, I had to join in with her because she was having the male characters say things that guys wouldn't say. And think about things that guys wouldn't do. We don't care what kind of shoes she's wearing. An example in one of our little books, we have our character sitting in a bar and his friend walks in and he's got a young lady on his arm. And Janet just described her as wearing this sleek red dress.
She had long black hair and a skimpy red dress. He changed it to
My friend came in with this young thing on his arm. There's a lot going on under that little red dress.
2 different heads here.
Yeah, that's getting into the mind of the male protagonist. I like it. Lena, how about you?
I like to read books by E. Phillips Oppenheim. I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but
Yeah.
he was the father of, he was called by some the father of suspense. And he was like the original real James Bond, where he lived through a time where there were spies with Nazis and poison and weapons hidden and smuggling of famous paintings across borders, and a lot of adventure and intrigue. And I like that. I try to put a little bit of that in my current books, just because I think that's fun. And he has a little bit of comic relief too, which I found interesting. And for this panel to prepare, I actually reached back and read the first mystery I ever read, which was The Secret of the Old Clock by Nancy Drew. And I thought I was going to find it corny and silly, but in fact, I loved it. I loved it, and I realized why I found Nancy so endearing and appealing. She was the first super sleuth, really.
Yeah.
And it was just, I had a lot of fun.
That's great. This still holds up. Richard, how about you? You reach far back or more recently?
I'm trying to think if we're going to go back to kind of what turned us onto the genre and still turns me on. I started out reading a lot of science fiction and horror and comic books as a kid, and then became a very serious college student and read a lot of serious literature. But I think what kind of tilted me was, for me, was Elmore Leonard, because I always felt that when I was reading that, I was actually reading a kind of very serious writer who's experimenting with dialogue and plot stuff, and his book stood out from a lot of the things. So rather than the classic mystery writers, that was where I started, and still go back to. That's the author that I think I've read. The only author I can say that I've read like every book that he's ever written, and so I kind of like the modern era. My books are all set in modern times, so.
Well, and I should take this opportunity to point out the depressing fact that to a lot of people, you reach back into the 70s and 80s, and I know my kids would see that as ancient history. Those are vintage.
Yeah, that's true.
Gar, how about you? What do you reach for?
Well, I'm actually going to digress a little bit just to point out that when I do these panels and I hear other writers speak, I'm always stunned by how very often somebody says exactly what I would have said. Their tastes and their development as a writer followed the exact same path as mine. So literally everything Richard just said, I could have said myself, because Elmore Leonard was easily a huge influence on my writing. I would venture to say that he's the only author that I've ever constantly said, I want to emulate this person, okay? And I literally wrote two books with that in mind. I was going to write my Elmore Leonard books. But again,
is
as
that
you pointed
Maneater and
out,
Firecracker, Gary?
that would actually be Maneater
Yeah.
and Firecracker.
Yeah, no, I could tell.
I'm still trying to do it.
Well, I think it's fair to do it, you know. I think after a while, obviously, you know, you develop your own take on it, your own voice, and you put your spin on it. But I think that, you know, the higher that you set your goals, the better off you're going to be. And I don't think you can set your bar any higher than Elmore Leonard. But very quickly, I was going to say that another thing Richard mentioned that is true for me is that the eras that I grew up reading and what that established my taste for crime, you know, go all the way back to Sherlock Holmes. That probably was the first mystery novel I ever read. And there was an online discussion not too long ago where somebody asked, you know, when we first introduced to Sherlock Holmes. And I think I was 7.
Wow.
And I knew right then, I said, I don't really understand everything I'm reading here, but I know I like it a lot. And that's how it all began. But if in terms of what I go back to now, in terms of an era, probably the 50s through the 60s, somewhere in that neighborhood, where it's just dated enough that I don't recognize everything, but I recognize enough to be able to relate.
So 7 years old Sherlock Holmes fan, you were either going to be an author or a morphine addict. So you chose correctly.
Well, 1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Brett, how about you?
Well, first I'd like to point out how Gar obviously didn't come prepared and cribbed his answer from Richard. For me, I think, you know, when I reach back, for me it's more in the 60s, 70s eras of the books that really still, I would still say influenced me. The Travis McGee novels, you know, are just, I've read them all multiple times. Very sexist, but very, very interesting and fun in weird settings, and you know, you learn about. I mean, it has this weird take on the '60s and early '70s.
Weird. I just read the first one. Have you ever read them? And
Yeah, they're just
they're
just
amazing.
great.
The
And
design
they're quick,
writing.
and they're so. I mean, they're short and quick and easy to read. Then, you know, my venture a little bit more into the thriller area, like you know, Eagle Has Landed and Black Sunday. You know, Thomas Harris and Jack Higgins and a lot of the Alistair MacLean books. I remember when I was like 12 to 15, I think I read everything that I could get my hands on by Alistair MacLean. And Robert Ludlum that really took over in my early late teens, early 20s. I read everything until I started to realize he's writing the same book over and over again eventually. But it was still really good.
Yeah.
You know, it was still a lot of fun. But those are kind of the things.
Yeah, and again, it's weird that I truly think those books are kind of considered a little vintage now.
Absolutely.
I think they've got a little bit of that patina on them.
Absolutely.
Well,
there's no you know, cell phones or laptops.
Well, yeah.
Anything else.
Now, since we've been talking about all these books that I think people still know and people still read and people still come to for the first time, you know, Agatha Christie is still the #1 best-selling author of all time. You know, there's just now a new movie adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, and it's all still very relevant. Would you say that crime and mystery fiction is maybe the most evergreen of genres? Is it have the longest legs of anything? Does anyone agree or disagree? What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that almost every book ever written is a mystery. So
At its core, yeah.
mystery is inherent in storytelling, and the biggest mystery is, you know, what is you know, if when somebody is taken from us, or you know, is finding out the truth behind different things like this. And I think in the mystery thriller genre, you know, we're drilling down to the very nut of that, you know, and it's just it's an intense
And
interest.
like you said, there's many books can be like Crime and Punishment, which is considered, you know, psychological literature, is actually basically a thriller about finding murder, you know, getting a murder to confess. You're in the murderer's mind. Great Gatsby is a crime story. You know, it's about a murder that happens, and these people get together to plot how to get out of it, and you're watching it from a perspective. I just read, speaking about Agatha Christie, I just read the first one of those too. For some reason, I was going back to pick up things that I'd missed, and it's the Death of Peter Ackroyd.
Yeah,
is the first one, and you know, I'm like, you know, this is quaint and old, and then I completely got fooled. Like, I had no idea what the ending was going to be, and it was like, you know, now I want to read more because it was such a great thing. But to go back to what I was saying, and then I just read a book called, everybody knows this, by Ford Maddox Ford, called The Good Soldier, and it's you know, classic literature from 1912 or something like that. But once again, I'm reading, I'm going, it's a murder mystery, you know, it's a crime story, and so if you dig down, like you were saying, a lot of them are. So of course it's evergreen because that's interesting. It's always going to be interesting.
It's also evergreen, I think, because life is a mystery, right? And we view mysteries daily. And so what better way to resolve those mysteries than read a book about it and kind of help the author, you know, figure out exactly who did it and what happened. So I think that's why it's so appealing, because we don't have answers to many things ourselves, but we can do that in books vicariously, and that gives us great satisfaction.
I'm sorry.
Also,
No, go ahead.
I think also it's always nice to see the bad guy get caught. One of my favorite authors, I just love, is Earl Stanley Gardner with the Perry Mason. He always gets this guy, I think, throughout the series, except twice or 3 times. But what is nice is to see someone get it out of intelligence rather than being someone's facing. Because that's exactly what he wanted Perry Mason to do, is to be intelligent, to be humanitarian, and to be sharp, and he got it through the law versus killing somebody or beating the truth out of them. So the idea of getting the bad guy in a different way was what really attracted me to mysteries.
I think the point that Lita made a minute ago is she used the word resolution. And I think that's really the main draw of crime fiction throughout the ages, is that things get resolved, you get answers. Generally speaking, you achieve some level of justice that's not always available in the real world. And I think as long as that's the case, you know, mystery crime fiction will have a place in literature.
You know, we touched a little bit on the changing idea of technology, and I want to know from you guys, do you think that the way technology has changed has helped or hindered a good mystery? Because, you know, these classic mysteries that we're talking about, there was no Google search, there was no DNA testing. You know, like Janet was saying, these people had to really rely on their wits and their smarts, and you know, guys like Sherlock Holmes, that was what was so appealing about these characters, is that it was their intellect that was solving the crimes. But now we have so many more tools at our disposal. Has that diluted the mystery genre a little bit? William's got some thoughts on this.
When you read different eras of mystery, you have to be prepared for a different pace. Because of all technology, the stories tend to move along a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Now, we all have shorter attention spans nowadays, but the
good point. Moving on. Let's.
But you know, before there were cell phones and copy machines and fax and email, you know, you had to find a phone booth. In fact, we were just talking about this the other day. We said that's a phrase we haven't used. Wait here while I go find a phone, which is what you used to have to do. But technology, I think, has changed the pace of it. I don't know about as far as the nature of the mystery, no.
Have you ever, in your writing about the 1950s, have you guys ever come up against something and then thought, oh no, darn it, they didn't have that yet? Yeah?
All the time. I remember they didn't have fax machines, they had some telegrams, but that was really, they had to go get it. It was seldom delivered in Los Angeles. So yeah, and we had to slow our pace and think, okay, excuse me, mic's not that better? Okay. So we had to think, okay, so what are we going to do without a cell phone? And how are they going to get... Okay, so let me ask a question. How many of you remember telephone booths when you sit down, the light clicked on? Remember that? Okay, how many of you remember the rotary phones?
Oh, yeah.
How many of you remember elevator operators and beautiful
Or party lines.
party lines? See, these are the things that we're dealing with in the 50s. And we've had to do a lot of research, and again, it slows things down because we have to go look for phone booths, or we have to wait for the telegram. So what are we going to do with the character that is waiting? So it's been interesting.
Right, we discovered that the first commercial photocopiers didn't come out until 1955. They were available, but only on a large corporate basis.
Yeah.
And the reverse of that is how difficult it is to write a mystery that takes place today. You know, it's like, am I the only one in the room, seriously, who watches Forensic Files and wonders how anyone ever gets away with a crime now? It's like, I watch the show and I'm going, how does anybody get away with murder anymore? Because, you know, there's all kinds of events, DNA that we've talked about. If you leave a fragment of anything behind on the crime scene, you're pretty much going to get caught. If you have a motive, you're going to get caught. I don't know why anybody even tries to commit murder anymore, because if you have a motive committed, you're pretty much going to get caught. But, you know, Brett touched on it a minute ago, cell phones, Eric, you mentioned the internet, Google, research, all this kind of things. It makes writing a really tight crime story and mystery that takes place today very, very difficult. It's like almost impossible to isolate someone from the rest of the world anymore. Okay, once upon a time you could get away with that. My cell phone died. I didn't charge my cell phone. I'm out of this cell service. I don't have cell service.
Really set that up.
And so many of us have done that to this point. You can't use that anymore. So what do you do to isolate someone so that they're in some form of danger, other than lock them in a room, you know, with no escape? It can be very, very hard.
And it's hard, like, keeping up, too, you know, because I grew up in the era before cell phones, and then cell phones came in, and everybody didn't have computers. So, I mean, you know, I'm a fairly up-to-date guy on technology, but it keeps going. And so by the time you sit down and write something, it's like, oh, God, now you can send, you know, I remember in my first novel, it was before you could really send a video to someone. And now you can send a video, and it's like, now that's old, you know, it's 10 years old. And, you know, it's all the technology that is used in that, going to an internet to an internet cafe, which they don't, you know.
Well, the job of a private investigator these days, he's basically an IT guy.
Right.
They spend most of their time on a computer.
That's what they say, yeah. 90% of them just sit there and they're on Google.
Well, that's what makes it most fun, I think, being a modern author. I don't know anything about technology, but I've had to learn about it. And so now I know things, you know, I can be really good at parties, talking about all the knowledge that I've gained from writing my books about the things that you could do with technology today. And I have a son who happens to be very high tech. And so I just go to him and say, could I do this? And he says, sure. And so I just throw in the book. So it's made a lot of fun to do things for just an average author, to come up with things that I would never know about. And plus, as authors in writing, I remember the days when I used a word processor. Oh my gosh. You know, and going back and doing it over and over again now, it's so simple. I'm so grateful for technology that way. And then one last point I want to make. Will had mentioned how it slows down the action, but again, I just read The Secret of the Old Clock with Nancy Drew. There's no slowing down the action. They just move ahead because the focus is on solving the mystery.
I mean, the time frames of your storyline sometimes.
Yeah.
The other thing was, as a result of all this, our readers are a lot sharper.
True.
You know, they're going to go, wait a minute. If we're not on it, technology-wise, you know, we're going to get called on it.
I had because we have our characters in 1950s Los Angeles, they're, you know, going out to dinner and stuff, and I happened to mention green jellos. Remember green jello salads? And someone wrote to me, says, no, the more popular green jello salad was red. So I want everybody to know that one of our books is wrong. The more popular jello salad is red, not green.
Oh yeah, historical details are the first thing to get you a letter from a reader. Absolutely. Well, some specific questions for some of you that I wanted to know. Let's start with Janet and William. You know, your Skylar Drake series set in the 50s, that was really the heyday of the pulp paperbacks, the detective stories. It was sort of the noir fiction had come into its own. So I want to know, who are your favorite LA-based detectives? Your series takes place in LA, and there's such a rich history of LA-based PIs and crime stories. Who are your favorites?
Janet mentioned hers. I like Ross McDonald and Lou Archer.
Yes.
In fact, we had been writing, and I had not been doing my homework well, and someone said, your writing sounds a lot like Ross McDonald, and I hadn't even read him at the time, so I've been reading all his books now, and yeah, very LA, and because LA is a character in itself.
Yeah.
In fact, he writes like us.
There you go. You could do worse with the comparisons than no. Now, Lita, you mentioned already Nancy Drew, and I think that Nancy kind of inspired a lot of young readers to either really dive into reading a lot or also inspire them to become writers. And these novels by Carolyn Keene about the girls, they were such a phenomenon, and they continue to be. So what can you tell us about why do you think that was so appealing? Because I think it's not only young readers who latched on to Nancy, right?
Right, absolutely. And I was going to say, when I reread it a few days ago, again, I thought it was going to be really corny and I wouldn't, get into it at all. But I remembered, I was 9 years old again. I remembered why she appealed to me so much, because she was a girl who accomplished things. She didn't just go to summer camp with her friends to go, throw horseshoes. She went because there was an abandoned cabin that held clues to a mystery. And what I liked about her is she could do absolutely anything. When the motorboat conked out on her, she fixed the engine. She would scale walls. She saved her friends from lynx attacks. She sabotaged an airplane of criminals getting away. Her father was a renowned lawyer, and he would ask her for help because she was just so adept. And that's what I found so appealing, my 9-year-old self, because, girls didn't do that. Before Nancy Drew, there weren't girl heroes. There were heroes who would save a girl from drowning and marry her a week later. And the heroes could do the impossible. Well, all of a sudden, here's Nancy Drew, and she can accomplish the impossible. She could cook a gourmet dinner for 6 and then go that night and, capture a criminal single-handed. So she came around, it was about 1930 when Nancy was born. Wonder Woman came about 18 years later, and Miss Marple actually was the same year, 1930. I did my homework for this panel. So there never was anyone quite like her before. So how could any young girl or even a woman of any age resist a character like that?
Would you say she's sort of the first feminist hero in that sense?
I would have to say that. Yeah, first super sleuth, superhero type. Yeah, absolutely.
Look at that. All right. Now, Richard, you've had 2 critically acclaimed short story collections among your work, and crime fiction, I think, really came into its own in short stories, like through Black Mask magazine, Dime Detective, and those old pulps throughout the 30s and 40s. I think it really brought crime fiction to the masses. So what do you think about the short form works so well for a crime or a mystery story?
I don't read a lot of traditional crime short stories, and it's kind of weird to me that mine get put into a crime category, but I understand why, because people have guns in them, and I wrote about bank robbery and stuff like that. What works for me, what I like about the writing about, what crime, writing about crime in these short stories is that it's very compressed and easy, and the way my stories are, they're not very plot driven. They're much more impressionistic. So I don't have to sit down and try to come up with, in a novel, I don't have to come up with an overarching plot and figure out all the technological stuff, like how can I get them, here and there and move them around. Because for me, that's the most difficult part of writing novels, is the actual plot. I mean, I'm great with the characters, I'm great with the dialogue, I've got all that. It's just when I have to sit down to plot, because I'm used to writing short fiction, which doesn't have plots. I've gone back and read a bunch of the old pulp stories, and they're great. They move, but they're pretty formulaic. After you've read 20 of them, you kind of get the idea, and you keep going. I kept going. It was called the Big Book of Pulps by Otto Penzler.
Right.
And so I started. I said I'm gonna read as far as I can go in this. And after about 20 or 30, I was like, I get it. You keep looking for a gem, and every once in a while something stands out. But
crime doesn't pay. We get it.
Yeah. They're odd. There are some really odd ones, but I'm always looking for stuff I can steal. Or something that like it's going to spark me to do something. So after a while, I kind of got everything I could get out of that. But for me, I think it's just like I say, as a writer, I'm able to just get to the heart of the matter very quickly. I can concentrate on character and dialogue and description rather than having to come up with the plot, which, as I said, is by far my weakest point, which is strange because I'll probably never publish another collection of short stories. It's just not, or not for a long time. I did 2 within 10 years, which is rare. And publishers only want novels. You know, they say, please don't write another collection of short stories. You know, but we'll let you because your first one did all right, and we want the novel that you pitched to us to go with it. But this is, you know, no more. You've got to write novels because they sell way more than short. People say they love short stories. Nobody buys short stories. You know, but with the novel, a lot of people read them. There's a chance for a movie. You know, and those things make publishers and agents very happy and work harder. So, you know, now I'm committed to. I've had to come up with 2 or 3 more novels down the road, thinking ahead. And though I love short stories and crime in particular, crime-based short stories, crime stories do not pay.
Good point. So, Gar, I'm going to put you on the spot here and make you educate us all here, because
Why? Because I'm the oldest one on the panel. That's messed up. That's not right.
Well, for me, the earliest African-American crime writer that I know of really is Chester Himes, but surely there were more notable authors before that I just don't know about, and that most people don't know about. Is there anyone I should be hip to in that world?
I'm laughing because I was thinking a moment ago, Lita's killing me, because there's nothing more embarrassing than when you're on a panel than to have someone else on the panel who actually did some homework before they got on the panel. It's like, what a concept. That's just totally absurd. No, the answer to your question is yes, Eric. There absolutely are more people than Chester Himes. He's the one that's most visible. Yeah. He's the one most people know about. There were other authors of color that worked in the crime genre before he came along. I want to say Michaud. There's an author named Michaud, but I can't remember the first name. But the one, of course, to ask is Paula Woods. Paula Woods wrote or at least edited an anthology many years ago, not long after I started writing in the late 80s. That was all about early crime fiction written by African Americans, and she's the one that should be sitting in this chair answering that ridiculous question that you just posed.
Get her on the phone, quick. Well, do you think that, as I know, I've talked with Gary Phillips a lot about this, and you know, you get up to the 60s and 70s, and there was much more of a niche market, and there was a more active marketing to some of those smaller markets with, you know, they could target certain neighborhoods, and the spinner racks were filled with a whole different slew of authors.
Right.
But it seemed like it took until about the 60s and 70s for that to happen. Or I mean,
you know,
there was that segregation before that? Or?
You know, it's an interesting question because so I wrote and published my first Aaron Gunner novel in 88, 89. And literally, as I was writing it, I had not seen, other than the Chester Himes characters, which dated back, of course, to the late 40s, early 50s, somewhere in the neighborhood, any characters of color in the mystery genre. Those people didn't exist. And it never really occurred to me at that time that was all about bigotry or prejudice, or that the market was just closed to people of color. And I didn't really care. I just knew that as a reader, let alone a writer, I wanted to see a protagonist in a classic private eye novel who looked like me, who lived in the neighborhoods that I lived in LA, that most of their people, most of their friends, their families were people of color. And so I kind of anticipated that there must be, you know, some forces at work that prevent books like that from being published when I initially submitted the book, but I never encountered them. So I don't really know what the case is. I will say this, that I think that probably part of the problem was, if you don't see yourself in fiction represented, it probably doesn't really occur to you to write yourself in fiction, you know. In my case, I wanted to be a writer. I love the mystery genre. Like Will, I absolutely love Ross McDonald. I read everything that he wrote. And I wanted to write a book featuring a character like me. And whatever the forces were that were going to prevent that, I was willing to take that chance. I just was fortunate enough not to encounter anything like that.
Great. Well, Brett, you have mentioned that you are definitely a straight-up thriller writer, and you've even ventured off. You've got a little bit of sci-fi. You've got these very high-concept novels that are just have so much imagination in them. And you touched on a couple of names, but I want to know who are those writers that really expanded your thinking in terms of like the hybrid sort of high-concept novels that you started writing. Was there anyone who really broke it open for you?
Oh, yeah, Stephen King, for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, it's someone who I think does. He's so pigeonholed as a horror writer.
No,
but
I don't actually read much of his horror. I like his other stuff.
Yeah.
The Dark Tower series is one of my all-time favorite series, and my Dark Tower series, or his Dark Tower. It's just this crazy, whacked-out thing that actually unites a whole bunch of his other novels under its umbrella. It's fantastic. The Stand is something that I've read, I don't know, 10 times, you know, and that obviously was a direct.
How do they describe those? Are those fantasy or are they sci-fi?
I would say they were more fantasy-esque. I mean, real-world fantasy sort of. I mean, and that I actually have a post-apocalyptical series that was definitely influenced by The Stand, you know, and inspired by that among other books too. But yeah, Stephen King would be the big one. Plus, I also got, when I started reading young, I was big into science fiction, and that was my first love. And Asimov and Clarke and Heinlein was great, and I just kind of buried myself into that stuff until I probably didn't read anything but that until I got into Alistair MacLean. And he only supplemented my still burgeoning science fiction reading at that time. So things with these higher concepts and these bigger worlds are something that have always appealed to me. But what I also wanted to do often with the bigger idea or stories like this, bigger or whatever you want to call it, fantastical concepts, they often lack the character development and these other things, and that was not something that I wanted to do because I enjoy good characters, and so I don't know. I mean, I'm not one. I can't say if I successfully did it or not, but I feel like I have, and that was my focus, was to kind of marry those two things together, I guess.
Mission accomplished.
Eric, I just want to cut in right here.
Yeah.
Just to go back to the question that you posed to Richard about mystery fiction and why it works in the short form.
Yeah.
Especially back in the pulp era, a lot of the stories you were reading, it's true of them, those stories are character driven. It's not so much about a big, huge problem to solve or this gigantic crime that needs a solution, as much as it is fascinating characters with a very small problem. And the driver of the getaway car, or the petty larcenist, etc., who's got some kind of problem to solve. He's in trouble and he needs to find a resolution to save his own neck. That's basically what those kinds of stories were about, and that kind of relatively small problem works really, really well in short fiction.
But that's also the heart of any really good story, is the characters.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can have the best idea for a story in the world, or a novel, or a series, and if your characters lack anything that people want to identify with, or that seem even halfway real, or they're just a bunch of cardboard characters up there, you lose your audience. People aren't going to read it. They're not going to remember it or anything. It's all about the people remember stories because of the characters.
It's particularly hard for me because I don't write about cops or good guys. Everybody in my book, most of the people in my books are bad people.
Memorable.
They're coming off. I'm coming off the Elmore Leonard. There's money and they're trying to get rid of it, and so it's a double challenge to try to make those people likable to readers, that they'll stick with you.
Right.
And they'll follow this guy that they normally wouldn't speak to on the street, and you're following him through the whole book, and you're understanding him or her and feeling, the feelings that they're having, and that's always very important to me to do this emotional thing. And it's doubly hard when you're trying to do it with bad people, but it's absolutely essential in there because people don't want to hang around these bad people normally.
Yeah.
One of our characters that we have throughout is patterned after Mickey Cohen. How many of you remember him? Big time LA mobster king. But when I went back to look at him, he was really a bad guy. But he was a real kick in the head. I mean, he was hysterically funny, the things that he did. Because he killed people, you know, murdered them, tortured them, but he was also a major character on TV. He was like a celebrity. And one of the funniest things I ever read about him is that he decided to open a men's haberdashery, and he was only going to sell suits only, but they're all the size that he wore. He didn't have any other size. Yeah, this is the type of character that I have a mob king in all 4 of our books. His name is Softy. And he is always appearing, always causing problems for our main character, which is Drake. But because of Mickey Cohen, I got a lot of good information with this guy who was killing people, but he's a real kick in the head.
Well, you guys have all confessed to the influences and the classics that you've read, but I want to drill down and get you to expose a little weaknesses maybe. And what are some classics that you haven't read and that maybe you want to get to? Lila, let's start with you. Is there some books out there that you're like, oh boy, I really should have read that and I just haven't yet?
Well, all the books that these gentlemen mentioned, I haven't read. I think I may have read one Elmore Leonard, but I tend to go toward the more lighthearted. Mm-hmm. I work a day job that's pretty intense, so I need some lightness. So I have always gravitated toward the more light, because every time I read something that's not light, I feel kind of upset afterwards. I don't like carrying that feeling with me. And you had mentioned characters. I love Dashiell Hammett's Nick and Nora Charles, the Thin Man, because they were so light. I mean, they solved mysteries, but they did it in a very lighthearted way while having a tremendous amount of fun.
And
so
alcohol.
For me, and alcohol, that certainly helped, I guess. But for me, the books need to have some element of fun in them. That's how I write as well, because I want to feel a lift after I'm finished writing it. I want my readers to feel the same lift. I want them to feel good. And again, back to Nancy Drew, who I only just rediscovered. I felt so good. I gave it to my mom, who's never read them before, and she said, "Wow, this was so great to read. They were simple. She has impeccable manners. Like I said, she gives respect and gets respect." I've forgotten all these things because I'm so used to seeing modern TV and modern books where they don't treat each other very well. And I'd forgotten that there was a period where people went out of their way to be respectful and kind to each other and to help other people compassionately. There's so much compassion. Nancy feels compassion towards everyone. And so I try to carry that through in my books as well. I have a female heroine who's a lawyer. It's the opposite of Nancy. And her father was a well-known private investigator. My female heroine is a bit bumbling. She's not as competent as Nancy was, because that part and all the coincidences that fall in Nancy's lap, I had a little bit of a problem with. But I still read it, and it's okay because we have coincidences in our own life as well. So I can accept that. But what was the question again? The books that I haven't read. So
yeah.
You know what? I've read Agatha Christie, but I'm afraid I find some of them a little tedious. A little, just a little. And who else? Raymond Chandler. I haven't read him, but I've seen all the Humphrey Bogart movies, and those are swell.
There you go.
So anyway, I've got a lot of reading to catch up on.
Don't we all?
I've always been very interested in international things, and Matthew Dunn is something. I have 2 books that I haven't gotten to, and he's supposed as a contemporary writer. I met him, in fact, I just met him this weekend. Really nice guy, so I'm really looking forward to reading some of his books.
I went back because all my books are standalones, and my publisher would love me to do a series, and I resisted it thus far, but 5 years from now maybe I won't be so resistant. So I'm kind of going back and trying to catch up on a lot of these things. So I'm reading the John D. MacDonald book. I went back and read the first one. Here's the problem, though, and the Robichaux,
James
Robichaux,
yeah.
So I'm going back and reading these guys, and the problem is, you really shouldn't start with the first book because they haven't developed everything yet. And if you're just diving in, I don't plan to read everyone. It might be better to go like 2 or 3 in, and then to figure it out, because they're interesting in their way in the beginning, but you can see when you get to the later books that they developed the style. So I'm going back and rereading the old series, these series that I missed. Like I had never read an Agatha Christie until 6 months ago. So, you know, I read that. I haven't read that much Sherlock Holmes. I still have a lot of that to read. But, you know, like I said, when I was a kid, for me, it was science fiction. And then after that, I was into very serious literature. So I'm going back and picking up a lot of the forefathers of the genre that I'm now associated with, which, you know, it's good in a way that I didn't read that stuff early because I didn't learn the rules. And so my books tend to not follow a lot of the genre rules, and I'm kind of grateful for that. I didn't get locked in early into a thing. So now that I know how to write and do this, it won't happen later. I can read these things safely, and I'm not going to get locked in. But once again, I can look for things to steal and when I ever do my series, I'll learn what's expected of me, and I can decide whether or not to do that.
There's nothing new in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all been done. Gar, what do you think? Oh, yeah, well, no, what do you think?
I was going to say James M. Cain. I mean, I've read read 2 or 3 of his, but I don't write that dark. I'm depressed when I finish one.
Yeah, I tried reading one, and I got 3/4 of the way through, and I had nightmares, so I stopped reading.
Well, as you firmly established, Derek, I should go back and read a lot of African American fiction that predated Rochester High.
Shame.
I'm just here to guilt trip
I
you.
don't know how I will ever live with myself. No, but actually I was sitting here thinking, you know, who haven't I read that, you know, people would expect, you know, a crime writer to have read, and I've really covered pretty much all the bases. The things that I haven't read in my lifetime that really embarrass me tend to be outside of genre. I mean, you know, great literature.
War and
The
Peace.
very sight of Moby Dick makes me. Yeah. So within genre, I think I'm pretty well read, but outside of it, I'm woefully uneducated.
Right? How about you?
This question just stabs me in the heart because
Oh,
every time I get together with any writing friends, like Gar and I get together quite often, and sometimes with Gary Phillips, and then I get Tim Hallinan and different people. They all start spouting off these authors and these books that they thinking that I probably know exactly what they're talking about. And I'm nodding and nodding and nodding. And eventually I have to admit I have no idea who they're talking about. And they're like, no, it's this titan in this. I mean, we were even talking science fiction, and you and Gary were giving me different names, and I'm going, but I know that genre. What? So pretty much everyone. And that would be my answer.
But you can be excused because in the time all of these guys are catching up on their reading, you've written 6 novels a year, you know, so.
Maybe.
You're inventing your own path,
Yes, right.
Brett.
I don't want to be influenced by anyone else, so I don't read.
That's good.
That is not.
Well, I want to know, there's a little bit of that, the thing that we touched on a little bit, the different mindset that you have to get into when you're reading something that's older, whether it's, you know, the 40s, 50s, or whether it's even the late 1800s of Sherlock Holmes, you know, and it's not just the technology, and it's not just the mechanics of the investigation, but a lot of times I mean, especially in the crime and mystery genre, tremendous amount of misogyny and sort of sidelining of the female characters. There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of sort of just very different attitudes to what we know today. How do you separate that? And when you go into reading something, you really do have to have kind of a different mindset, right?
With our books, I'm not going to use this thing, I promise, by the end of today. With our books, each book takes the reader from LA to another setting, another location. Our first book went from LA into Santa Rosa, 1950s, and there was a lot of things going on with the field workers and Cesar Chavez, so we included that in our book. The second one goes into pre-statehood Hawaii, and so we spent a week in Molokai to get the history of Molokai in 1950.
Well, that's a tax write-off. Nice job.
Big time. Have you been to Molokai? I don't know how people live there. I really don't. I couldn't wait to get back to Honolulu. Anyway, what we found is in 1955 there was a huge push not to enter statehood. The locals did not want it, and there were picket lines and all sorts of bad things. And it failed. They didn't get in till they didn't become a state until 1959. So we included that in our book. The third book goes into 1955 Las Vegas, and we had no idea of the segregation there. It was huge, and we included that in the book. This fourth book is takes place in Long Beach, 1955, and deals with the oil conspiracies and the real estate issues that were going on at the time, and how they're finding dead bodies all over the place. I got to think about dead bodies, and I love writing about them. So, but see, all the history that we also include in our books, we don't ignore it, we include it.
Quickly, we belong to a critique group, and we've got some fairly spunky women in our books. And we were called on that by a couple of people. They said, well, women wouldn't talk to a man that way. Well, this one does, but yeah, you talk about misogyny and about the sexism and sex roles. I think sometimes people expect that when you're writing the 50s, but it's not all Donna Reed. There were a lot of very forward-thinking women and men at that time.
Yeah. Lita?
I agree with Will that there were a lot of forward-thinking women. Again, I mentioned E. Phillips Oppenheim, which I don't think anyone in this room has probably heard of, but in Great Britain he was a best-selling author during his lifetime. He was very successful. But I find that the women in his books are actually quite strong. They too do things, but there is some misogyny in there as well. But I try to avoid books like that because I don't find them interesting at all.
Don't read any Mickey Spillane, though.
I don't.
It's my tip to you.
I haven't and I won't. But yeah, I don't like it when women are swooning or fretting because it's just boring to me. I need people of action. I need people who do things, not people who just kind of fade into the background. And that goes for the men too. I don't like it when the men just do nothing. I need my characters in the books I write and the books I read to be characters of action and to serve a worthwhile purpose. It's kind of like I eat that way as well. I need it to have some redeeming value. Otherwise, I won't move forward with the book.
Right.
I tend when I pick up those books and you come across that stuff, which you come across it up into the 70s and 80s. I mean, when you're like, but those are old books now, according to you.
Yeah.
As documents, more like a historical document of a period and the kind of thinking that was going on in those periods, as repugnant and silly as it might be. I'm reading a book right now by Bill Bryson called Summer 1920. It's about the summer of 1927. It's a nonfiction book. Yeah, and it's going in. It had this whole chapter on eugenics, which was a huge thing in the U.S. in 1927. There were actual newspapers were behind it, famous authors were behind it, there were politicians behind it. Eugenics is the process of weeding out the defective in society. And this was in 1927, they were still talking about this openly in the United States. And you're just thinking like, oh my God, the people, like this was like the average thinking that was going on in people's heads back then. And it makes what's going on now look, tame. I mean, actually what it made me think is, God, at least we've moved, a little further beyond that. Nobody says that openly anymore. Because I'm sure they're behind closed doors, these conversations are going on, but at least we've moved that far. So, when you come across things like that are casually dropped in, these things are casually dropped into these old pieces of fiction, I think for me, I just take them as it's a historical document. I'm not gonna. It's hard to hold it against the author because, you shouldn't have done that, but they're coming from a completely different time than we are. So it's hard for me to be judgmental like that.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, not to interrupt you, Gar, but we only have a few minutes left, and I do have more to ask, but I do, if anyone in the audience has any questions, I do want to give the option. We are all going to be upstairs signing books and available for any follow-up questions, so no pressure because I have more. But I just wanted to throw it out there if anyone has any questions, any thoughts. No? Good? Oh, one over there.
I have a question. James, for those who, I know you take notes for stories, but for the others, do you have like a character profile or what the character, the rules, like he would never do this or she would do this? Or do you actually have something?
I think we all probably write bios. I know I do of all the main characters and even the secondary ones, so I can keep track of what their personalities are like. And
We do not all write
Oh,
bios.
Whoa, way too much work.
I write bios, so I can keep track, and I want to know what's,
Although I was telling my daughter just this morning, because she's going to be writing a story thing for her senior project next year, that, hey, you should start bio pages on all your characters and telling her what to do. I don't do that.
Yeah. Show me some ears, Dad.
No, I'll show you how to make it. I don't want to influence you too much.
My husband and I write very differently. I am an outliner. Nothing goes on the paper without a full detail of a person's character, like the zodiac sign, shoe size. I mean, I have to have a really clear picture of the character.
She
He
does the whole
writes-
family tree.
Yeah, I am a control freak, what can I say? He does it very differently. He's what's called a pantser. He just sits down and writes. And so the fact that we're combined together and we're still married shows us that it's a mixed marriage. Mixed writing marriage. But again, I know exactly what my characters will or will not do, or what he's got to be pushed into in order to perform. There's absolutely nothing I don't know about all my characters.
I think the danger of creating bios, especially if they're really in depth and thick, in terms of a binder and all this kind of thing, is that, believe me, if you go to all the trouble of creating all that detail about your character, you're going to use it. It's going in the book. And that probably means that a lot of that is fat that is going to, at some point, slow your story down. So, like Brett, I've never used bios. I think I have a general idea of who my character is. And in terms of just the fun of being an author, I enjoy coming upon those things as on the fly. It's like, wait a minute, he has a dog named what? That sounds pretty cool, rather than have it written down and say, oh, I gave him a dog named Bruno, and I got to put him in here somewhere, So it's a matter of taste and how you operate. But I've never
can I
detailed my
qualify
characters
what
to
I
that
said?
extent. No, you had your turn. I'm sorry.
I write by the seat of my pants as well, but I do the bio just to have it there, just in case I need to go back, and there are times when I never go back and look at it.
Nice qualifying.
But thank you.
So as long as the character is set, then the story can go anywhere, and you know how the character is going to respond to what happens in the moment. I think that's good. Well, unfortunately, I think we are out of time here. Come on up and see us at the tables upstairs.
Do any of you go to like police stations or detectives?
Oh yeah. How do you get out and about for your research?
We spent a weekend at the Sheriff's Museum in San Diego, and I had the opportunity of interviewing a gentleman who was with LAPD in the 1950s. He's in a wheelchair now. We had a great time talking about it. Then they let us go upstairs and look at some of the paperwork from the 1950s. What we found out, which we had no idea, is that in 1950, LAPD, all the PDs in Up and Down California, used the word ambulance as a verb. We ambulanced them to the hospital. That was a real surprise. And a lot of other syntax that was very different.
It's a good little detail.
I write about bad people, so I don't want to go anywhere.
And Brett,
I've spent too much time there. That's why I'm writing about them. And I'm trying to stay out of those places.
Brett, your Rewinder series is about time travel, right?
Yes, so I did do some time.
Excellent.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. There are things you just don't want to know.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you to all of our authors. Like I say, we're all going to be upstairs signing books and answering more questions. Thanks for joining us today.